The soft hum of the city drifted through the glass walls of my corner office, but I hardly noticed it. My hands rested lightly on the smooth mahogany desk, the silk of my blouse sliding over my wrists, a gentle reminder that I belonged here, though no one in my family would have ever believed it. I glanced out the window at the sun dipping behind the skyline, painting the buildings gold, and felt a familiar twinge of irony. The people who once told me I was nothing wouldn't recognize the woman they dismissed if they tried. My phone buzzed, jolting me from the quiet reverie. A text from Mom. "Dinner at Dad's tonight. You're coming, right?" I stared at it for a long moment. Every word felt like a challenge. The same dining room where their dismissive laughs still echoed. The same faces that had undermined me, made me shrink into myself. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the tension knot in my shoulders. There was a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of my lips. I had a secret now, one they weren't ready for. Not just the promotions, the awards, the recognition, but something more tangible, commanding, something that would make them see me not as the girl they'd mocked, but as a force they could never have imagined. And tonight, the past would collide with the present. The dinner invitation wasn't just a call to family, it was a summons to a reckoning. I adjusted my cufflinks, took a slow breath, and whispered to myself, let's see if they remember what they said. I remember that dinner, as if it were etched into my skin. I was 17, sitting at the long, polished oak table with my family's laughter and chatter swirling around me like smoke I couldn't escape. My father, always serious, barely looked at me. My stepmother, her voice sweet but sharp, had cornered me with a sly smile. "You know, Sophie," she said, pausing for effect, "you really are nothing compared to Claire. Maybe you should try harder to." I felt my throat tighten, my hands pressing into my lap until my knuckles turned white. The words didn't just sting, they burned. Nothing. That single word, repeated so often, lodged itself deep inside me. I could see the smirk on my younger brother's face, the way he tried not to laugh, the way my father didn't intervene. I wanted to shrink into the chair, disappear into the patterned rug beneath us, vanish into the shadows where their judgment couldn't reach me. But there was a small voice whispering inside me, soft, persistent, like the memory of my grandmother's hands resting on mine the summer before. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are," she had said, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. "The world is bigger than this table, bigger than their words. One day they'll see you." That summer, she had given me a delicate silver compass.
"For when you feel lost," she had said.
I'd pocketed it, spinning it between my fingers whenever doubt crept in, a talisman against their cruelty. The next morning, I packed a small bag, not with rebellion, but with determination. I enrolled in extra classes, took odd jobs, stayed up late teaching myself things no one at that table thought I could do. Every insult, every dismissive glance, every whispered "she'll never succeed" became fuel. I wasn't just running away from their judgment. I was racing toward a life they would never expect. By the time I left that house that summer, I wasn't just a girl hurt by words. I was Sophie Bennett, the girl who had begun to write her own story, one chapter at a time, armed with a compass and a quiet, burning certainty that I would rise. The first months after leaving home were hard. I lived in a cramped studio apartment, the walls thin enough that I could hear the city breathing around me. Every morning, I reminded myself of my grandmother's compass, turning it over in my hand as if it carried the world's promise. I didn't have much, just a few dollars, a stack of textbooks borrowed from the library, and a stubborn determination to prove I was more than the girl at that dinner table. It was during one of those long nights, hunched over a desk littered with papers and coffee cups, that I met Lieutenant Colonel Julia Hawkins. She was a retired officer, now mentoring young professionals. I met her at a career seminar, and something about her presence, the way she carried authority without arrogance, made me sit up straighter. "You've got potential," she said after I nervously delivered a presentation. "But potential alone doesn't open doors. You need grit, strategy, and the courage to be unapologetic about your ambition." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I had grit in spades, but the courage had to be cultivated. Over the next months, Julia became my guide. She taught me how to network, how to negotiate, how to take charge without asking permission. I poured myself into every project, learning late into the night, sometimes until my eyes burned and my hands cramped from typing. I made mistakes, small, sometimes humiliating, but each one became a stepping stone rather than a setback. I took on projects that others ignored. The first big client I landed felt like climbing a mountain I had no right to scale, but I made it to the summit. Then another, and another, each success quietly cementing the foundation of the life I was building. Slowly, the girl who had been nothing became someone who mattered, not in their eyes, but in reality, in the world I was carving out. I kept this life hidden from my family. My social media posts were modest, often showcasing sunsets or books I loved, never the awards, promotions, or accolades. I didn't want their envy, their pride, or their false concern. I wanted this achievement to be mine, untainted by the old judgments. By the time I turned 25, I was managing my own small consulting firm, respected in my field, my voice carrying authority that even my former detractors couldn't ignore. I had offices, loyal clients, and mentors who believed in me, who reminded me daily that the world saw me differently than the dinner table ever had. Yet, despite the success, a quiet question lingered every time I thought of that family dinner. What would it feel like to see them look at me and finally understand? Not the girl they once dismissed, not the nothing they assumed I was, but the woman I had become, commanding, unstoppable, and entirely my own. That question, like a gentle drumbeat, stayed with me. And tonight, with that dinner looming, I was ready to let it be answered. The evening air was crisp when I stepped into my childhood neighborhood, the same cul-de-sac I had fled years ago with nothing but determination in my bag. The house looked smaller now, somehow diminished in my memory. I adjusted the tailored blazer over my blouse, smoothed the front of my skirt, and reminded myself that I was no longer the girl who had trembled at that same doorstep. I was Sophie Bennett, consultant, entrepreneur, and yes, ma'am Colonel in the reserve. The words felt good on my tongue, even if no one here yet knew them. My father's voice boomed from the doorway before I even reached it. "Sophie, you came." His smile faltered when he saw me. The expected uncertainty in my step was absent. I offered a polite nod, letting the silence hang for a beat before stepping inside. The dining room hadn't changed much. Polished oak, framed family photos, and the same chandelier that had cast a judgmental glow over me years ago. My stepmother's eyes flicked toward me, scanning, calculating. My younger brother smirked nervously, and for a fleeting second, I felt the old tug of anxiety, but it passed. I had rehearsed this, though life had already rehearsed me better. "Dinner's ready," my father said, motioning toward the table, his voice slightly too cheerful. I followed, letting them think this was just another family meal. They were not prepared. I slid into the chair at the head of the table, the place I had once been denied. The room smelled of roasted chicken and bread, mundane smells carrying the ghosts of past humiliations. I allowed my eyes to drift over the faces before me. Each one was waiting for the struggling Sophie, the one they could condescend to. Instead, they found the woman who had quietly grown in their absence. I let my gaze linger, letting the weight of my presence settle over them before speaking. "I've been working on some exciting projects," I began casually, pulling out a sleek folder from my bag. I placed it on the table with deliberate care. "Most of my clients are government contractors, and I recently received a promotion that allows me to oversee strategic operations across multiple states." There was a beat of stunned silence. My stepmother's fork hovered midair. My father's hand tightened on his chair. My brother blinked too fast, as if trying to convince himself this was some illusion. "And as of last month," I added, letting a subtle smile curve my lips, "I've been formally commissioned in the reserves. Colonel Sophie Bennett, at your service." The words landed like a hammer. My father's boss, seated beside him for this dinner as a courtesy, leaned forward and said with measured admiration, "Ma'am Colonel." His eyes held a respect I had never seen at that table. I let the silence stretch, watching disbelief and shame ripple across the familiar faces. Their mouths moved, searching for words, but none came.
This was not the girl they had dismissed.
This was a force they could not ignore, a culmination of every late night, every sacrifice, every whispered word of encouragement from my grandmother. For the first time, I felt the room bend to my presence, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. Every scoff, every cruel word from years ago had propelled me here. And now, finally, they understood. I was no longer the nothing they had written me off as. The room was heavy with silence, a mix of awe, guilt, and disbelief pressing against the walls. I let it linger a moment longer, giving each of them a chance to confront the truth, that the girl they had dismissed as nothing was now undeniably, unquestionably, someone who commanded respect. I took a slow breath, folding my hands neatly on the table. I didn't come here tonight to gloat, I said, my voice calm, firm, carrying the authority that had been cultivated in years of discipline and hard work. I came to show you that your words, your doubts, do not define me. But I also came to offer you something, an opportunity to change. On my terms. My stepmother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father shifted uncomfortably. My brother's eyes flicked between me and the floor.
Good.
Let them feel the weight of their past judgments. I will help you, but only if you are willing to grow, I continued. Dad, you've been too consumed by appearances and work to see what's important. You need to listen more than you speak, to support without expecting control. My father nodded slowly, a mixture of pride and shame in his eyes. To Claire, I said, turning my gaze to my stepmother, stop trying to compare me to anyone else. Stop undermining people to elevate yourself. Learn to support others without resentment. Her fingers tightened around her fork, but I let the words hang in the air, unyielding but fair. And my brother, Jason, I said softly, stop letting your insecurities dictate your actions. Work on your ambitions, not on putting others down. You're capable of more than you think, but you have to try. I placed the silver compass from my grandmother on the table. This guided me when no one else would. Let it remind you that direction comes from within, not from judgment or comparison. They stared at it, understanding dawning slowly, as if seeing me, not the Sophie they knew, but the woman I had become. I'm giving you all a choice, I added, my voice gaining strength. You can continue as you were, or you can grow into people capable of real respect for yourselves and for others. I will support you if you choose the latter, but only if you are sincere. No half measures, no excuses. The room shifted subtly. My family, once towering in their authority over me, now seemed smaller, humbled. I was no longer the one shrinking, apologizing, or retreating. I held the upper hand, not through spite, but because I had earned it with integrity, resilience, and courage. And in that quiet, deliberate moment, I realized the transformation wasn't just mine. It was theirs to make if they chose to. For the first time, the balance had shifted. The dinner table was no longer a place of judgment and dismissal. It was a space for possibilities, for growth, for respect earned the hard way. I leaned back, letting them absorb it. My eyes softened. I care about you all, but change is not optional. For the first time, the room seemed lighter, charged with a possibility that had been absent for years. And I knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of something real. Weeks passed after that dinner, and the change I had asked for began to take root, subtly, quietly, but undeniably. My father started asking questions not to judge, but to understand. He listened, really listened to my advice and the perspectives I shared. My stepmother enrolled in a leadership workshop, learning to mentor rather than criticize, to build rather than diminish. Jason, my brother, surprised me one morning by showing me the first draft of a business plan he'd been working on, eyes bright with ambition instead of the usual defensive glare. I watched them grow with a strange mixture of pride and relief. Change was slow, imperfect, but tangible. And through it all, I remained Sophie Bennett, steady, unwavering, no longer haunted by the echoes of "you're nothing." One evening, I found myself in my office, turning over the silver compass my grandmother had given me so many years ago. Its delicate chain gleamed in the warm light of the desk lamp. I traced the smooth edges with my fingers, remembering her words. The world is bigger than this table, bigger than their words. I smiled softly, realizing that every late night, every sleepless hour, every challenge I had faced had led me here. The compass was no longer just a token of hope. It was a symbol of strength, direction, and resilience. Looking out my office window at the city lights below, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had endured their doubts, their dismissals, and emerged not just victorious, but whole. My relationships had shifted, not perfectly, but with a foundation of honesty, respect, and boundaries I had fought to claim. For the first time in years, I felt entirely at peace with the past. The girl who had been nothing had become a woman who could command respect, inspire change, and still maintain compassion for those who had once wounded her. I clasped the compass in my hand one last time, whispering a promise to myself, I will never let anyone define my worth again. And as I placed it gently back on my desk, I felt a quiet power settle around me, one that was both enduring and serene. I had survived. I had grown. I had conquered the shadows of my past. Tonight, when I tell this story to myself in the quiet of my office, I know the truth that my family and the world will never forget. I am Sophie Bennett, and I am no one's nothing.